Hi, I'm Scott at ediblemusic.com. How does an LFO work? You might have seen one on your synthesizer or as an effect in your workstation, but it might seem rather unclear or opaque about how exactly you should make use of one. But once you start making use of one, you will find that it is an incredible creative tool and you'll want to use it all the time. Because you'll have probably seen it on a synthesizer, I want to show you first how to make use of it on there, but then I want to show you some other ways to make use of it too that are really exciting. Here's a synthesizer that is just set to a sine wave. If I turn on the LFO, let's say okay, so what's happening there? Well, when the way that a synthesizer works is that it has these oscillators that produce tones. And so if you play a low tone, then the oscillator will produce a sound wave that is very slow. You know, you'll have probably seen sound waves like that. A sine wave just moves straight up and down. A low note will have a slow wave, whereas a higher note will have a much faster wave. But low frequency oscillators, or LFOs, produce their oscillations or produce their frequencies below where we can even hear them, around 6 hertz all the way down to 1 hertz, less than 20 though. That's the boundary of where our hearing can usually extend. And so below those, this low frequency oscillator doesn't produce sound that we can hear, but instead the waves that it produces have an effect on the actual sounds that are being produced. It's sort of like a controller for the parameters of an instrument or of an effect. So because the sound wave of a low frequency oscillator will move like that, it kind of cycles back and forth. You can think about having a, a center point where nothing is happening, and then the wave kind of goes up and down, above and below it. And as it does that, then the effect will be heard. So if you were to change the rate, which is the rate of the sound wave, a slower rate will affect it more slowly, while a higher rate will affect it much more quickly. But you can hear how it kind of cycles back and forth like that. And then the amount determines just how much of the effect should be added. So if we were to have it very low, it just sounds like a little vibrato effect. That's cool. Now let's get into it at a little bit more detail because LFOs are useful beyond just within synthesizers, but you can use them in your production and your studio work as well in your workstation. So here's a nice synth pad. Really nice. And I'll add an LFO first, and then we'll add some effects to modulate it. We're going to use the LFO to affect the auto pan here. And so different LFO tools will have some different features, but there will be core features that are common through all of them, and you'll want to know those. The rest are just additional things. But the first thing that you'll want to set is the wave shape. Here we've got a sine. You could change it to a triangle wave, or even something quite random. And you can see how the shape of the wave differs. The shape of the wave is really important because it influences how the parameters will be influenced. We saw the cyclical kind of effect that a sine wave had. A random one will just move randomly, of course. The rate is the second feature that you'll want to make sure that you're familiar with. This influences the speed of the oscillator. So a very low rate compared with a very high rate. And the third feature that you'll want to make sure of is depth or amount. You can see if we measured this center point to be sort of neutral, then the depth will determine whether anything happens or whether it strays from that center point and goes up and down or above and below it by quite a lot. Now, the way that an LFO works is that you want to map it to the parameter that you want to control. So let's map it to the amount. And you can see how, in accordance with the shape of the wave, the amount parameter now is being changed. A really common way that you might make use of an LFO is with a filter. So you can map it to that as well. That's cool. Now here's a little experiment. What if you use an LFO to control an LFO? We'll set this to random and map it to the rate. It's really cool, right? So give it a try. Experiment with the different settings. I find often if it's just applied to a fairly basic sound, like this synth sounds really nice, but you can also use it on more complex sounds. And you can use it in a subtle way to sort of add some variety and some liveliness. It's a way of automating something like a tremolo or different effects like that, but you can also add a lot of movement and some rhythmic energy to a sound using it and add some surprise as well. Try it out.